Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is David, and for those of you who do not know, I am a chartered building surveyor. I have a first-class master's degree in commercial building surveying. I'm also a director of a surveying and architectural firm, and over the last 8 years I have advised on over £240 million worth of commercial and residential property. A lot of that was heavily negotiated, so in this video I'm going to share with you what I've seen working, so hopefully you can negotiate your house price. Now, let's jump right in. First thing is there is a thing going around called the 5 to 10% negotiation rule. In my opinion, this is not a good rule, simply because 5 to 10% does not take into account the cost of various defects that we're seeing in old and new property. And it also, a lot of the time, doesn't take into account some of the cost required to do, let's say, an extension, which a lot of the time properties are advertised as being development potential, all that kind of stuff. It's really important to understand what your potential outlay may be if you had to repair your building, or if you want to put value onto it. You have to work out what that will cost and what the building could look like in terms of a new figure in the future. Okay, second is understanding the market. Now, I don't mean there's a property there's property here, these are the prices. Obviously that is important. What's even more important is understanding what the asking price is of the particular category that you're looking at in relation to what they're actually being sold for. For example, at the moment, I seem to be observing houses in the 800 grand bracket being sold to quite actually significantly under this price, like from at least 50 to 200,000 pounds under, which is actually based, some of the bigger chunks are based on defects, whereas some of the smaller ones, they're newer buildings, they don't have as many major problems. That's not always the case, actually. I'll do another video on that. But I've also noted buildings that are in the 1 to 1.5 million bracket. Some of them are actually being negotiated by significant chunks of money. For example, we had a client last year who we saved about £400,000 on a property that was advertised for £1.5 million. The reason is the building had so many defects and it had so much work needing to be done to put it into a good state of modern repair that it would have cost so much money that, okay, I'm going to rewind on this. Essentially, we worked out the costs were going to be about 300k at the minimum. And then we basically went to the real estate agent and said, look, if we do that, is the building then going to be worth £1.8 million? No way. Maybe way down in the future, but not for a long time. And it was too much of a risk. We ended up getting 400k off, which was fantastic for the clients. So yeah, understand what asking prices are in relation to what they're being sold. Now, there's a whole load of ways you can do this on the internet, and obviously it's going to depend where you are, but a bit of Googling, you'll be able to find out. Okay, number 3, defects. Now, I know that I've already talked about defects, but it's just that important. Simply because they can cost a surprising amount of money to fix. Now, obviously all defects are different and they all have different cost implications, but I'm going to give you a bit of a crash course, and I will do another video on this if you want. Let's start with the roof. Now, when you look at a building, the key things, the really critical things to look for are, is it straight and level? Is the roof, the very top of it, this is called the ridge tile on a pitched roof, is it straight and level? If it's got any really contrasting wonkiness or anything like that, get a professional to look at it before you buy it, or just don't put an offer in whatsoever. The other things to consider is if it has got some deflection, some movement, you need to think about it might not just be the very top of the roof that's got a problem. It may be the areas below. The insulation may be saturated. The timber may have decay. There may be stuff going on there that a structural engineer is probably the only person who's going to be able to really identify and advise on the repair options. So it's very significant and very important to work out. The next thing are the elevations. These are the walls. Basically, make sure they're straight and level. If they've got big cracks, it's a no-go, and you're going to need a professional to come and look at the thing. Again, I will do another video that explains this in more detail, but what I'm going to do just to round this section off is ultimately you really need a professional to go in to look at these particular things, especially if you're actually committed to it. Make sure it's sound, simply because the costs and the safety implications, of course, significant. And we're finding people don't actually understand the cost to make the building safe and in full repair. Building materials have just gone through the roof at the moment, and I don't think enough of the lay population actually understand that. And I'm going to touch on one of the problems further down the line that we're seeing, which you need to take into account, and it's absolutely critical. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the more negotiation strategy side of things. And we're going to start with number 4, which is going to be, don't be the one who puts in the offer. Ask the seller for their best offer, simply because that way you get a new anchoring price point, then you can put in the counter offer. You don't want to put in the first offer simply because it might be above what they were going to potentially put as their lowest offer. Really simple, but try and get that as the first negotiation. Okay, number 5 is going to be, don't be negative. Now, if you go to a property with a real estate agent who's selling the thing and you say, oh, it's a dump, like it's not worth that, blah, 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 all you're going to be doing is getting that back up. They're not going to want to help you. They're just going to feel a little bit offended. They're going to be a bit like, oh, mate, okay, whatever, take it or leave it. The better thing to do is to do what I like to call the interpersonal, that's what it is, negotiation. And what I mean by this is, say if you went to look at a property that was 800 grand and had a load of problems, if it's an older building or whatever, you can just say, look, for me, I can only do this because of this, and I'm sorry, don't want to offend you. That's what it is. Now, what's really good about that is because nobody can argue with your personal position. They just can't. It's not like you're going to the property and saying, oh, I don't think it's worth this, because someone would say, yeah, it is. So if you put your personal circumstances on the plate, lay it down and justify your first offer on that, at least you can sort of explain to them what the crack is. They can't argue with you. I normally find when you actually just be honest, people normally try and accept it. They'll try and help you maybe, but I think it's the best way to do it. If you've got alternatives, let me know. Okay, so the next thing is going to be desensitize yourself. What I mean by this, and it might sound really silly, but when you go to look at properties, you're going to start to get really attached and something's going to fall through. You're going to get really upset. It's harder to negotiate when you think you might lose the property. But there's always another building. There's always another opportunity around the corner. And a lot of the time, you'll find something that you actually like more. So desensitize yourself to losing the property and you'll be better at negotiating. Okay, so the number 8 is going to be understand when there is no negotiation. What we're finding is there are 2 reasons why people aren't negotiating. The first thing is some people just don't need the money, which is crazy. And the second thing is that people seem to think they're so entitled to making these big markups on property, which without basically doing anything, that they just don't budge. And those kind of people just won't negotiate. And I mean, it just is what it is. I mean, we have actually noticed that those kind of properties that have been on the market for like 2 years, haven't moved, are actually starting to come down in price quite significantly. And I think people are starting to panic that if they don't just do the thing now, they're going to lose even more money in the future. In my opinion, I don't think we've actually hit the bottom of the housing market, because if you consider the average deposit against the average mortgage rate, it's so incredibly wide that average people, like professionally qualified people, can't afford the average house. And I think people are like, I don't really want to. So I'm just not entirely sure we've got to the bottom. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video was because the more people who are going out there and being really hardboiled negotiators and actually pointing out that a majority of the housing stock has so many problems, we shouldn't be paying these over and above figures for them. The more people that do it, I think the more pressure there is going to be on the sellers to bring the housing prices down. Yeah, okay. Number 9. Now, this is going to be pretty controversial, and I'm sorry, but it has to be said. 99% of real estate agents actually don't know what they're talking about, and they're really bad to take advice from. For example, I went with a client a couple of months ago to have a look at a property with them. It was just a bit of a favor to see if it was something that I actually should proceed with. We met the real estate agent there, and my clients have been told that this building was a concrete cavity blockwork building with essentially a cavity. Now, the reason why that's important is because if it's something else, like a solid block wall, you're going to have loads of problems with damp. They're really old. They're just pretty damp buildings. Some of them are really nice. You can upgrade them to make them waterproof, and you can install good thermal provisions, but it's very costly. But anyway, the real estate agent had told my clients that the building was a cavity, was a concrete blockwork cavity building, but it wasn't. It was like a solid stone property that had walls like this thick, completely damp. I mean, you wouldn't have been able to tell if you didn't have a damp meter. And my client was like, oh my God, this guy either doesn't have a clue what he's talking about or he's completely lied to me. If I'm honest, I'm not sure which one it was, but this is not the first time I've seen this. There's been so many times where I've gone to look at a property, I've done a survey, I've done the negotiation for somebody, but the client has not understood, or they've been told that the building is something completely different to what it actually is. Now, real estate agents, depending on where you are, actually don't have any responsibility to do that. It's up to the buyer to fully understand. And I think this is terrible because there's some sort of general perception that real estate agents are property professionals in that they understand the building, they understand the cost implications of various defects. They don't. They actually just don't do it. And the ones that are doing it stop, because you're screwing people over. Now, the other thing that's really, really important that relates to this is if you're looking at something that has development potential, a real estate agent might be able to say, okay, if you do this extension, the building might be worth X amount in the future. But 9 times out of 10, they will not understand the cost to do the thing. And it's really, really important to understand, because if you're buying a building for £1 million and you want to put an extension on it to hopefully sell it for some profit in the future, doesn't matter when it is, the cost of the building materials to do that particular project are so above and beyond what most people think they are that people are making some really bad decisions. And what we're seeing is real estate agents giving people indications that the cost of doing these things is actually quite low. It's really not. And what I recommend doing is, to get a bit of an overview, is to actually go onto your building insurer's website and find out if they have something called the reinstatement cost figures. What they do there is they'll give you an idea of the square meter rates to essentially rebuild a building. And what you can do is then apply that to like a general area of, say, like an extension you want to do. Then you'll have an idea of how much a piece of work could cost. And that way you can understand what the building, what kind of profit you can make on a building when you do such an extension. Now, I did another video on this which explains how I saved one of my clients £175,000 on their property purchase, which factored in things like building defects and the extension they wanted to do so they could make some money on the property in the future. And I'm going to link it up here. Yeah, okay. Guys, if that was helpful, remember to like so other people can hopefully see the video. If you want to learn more about negotiation and property negotiation, all that kind of stuff, remember to subscribe to my channel. And of course, if you have any comments, please put them below and I will come back to you as soon as I can. Great. Cheers for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.